And now tonight, part 2 of a special report on driving while ability impaired by marijuana. We first learned how officers can spot if a driver is high behind the wheel. And now Chase Houle explains how those cases might hold up in court.
Robert King has been practicing law in Monroe County for 14 years. He says prosecuting drug driving cases involving marijuana is subjective because unlike alcohol, there is no breath test.
If you're over a .08, you're guilty of driving while intoxicated under the law in New York State. And the law involving marijuana is if you're under the influence of marijuana, then you're guilty of a crime. That's a subjective standard.
King says in New York, there's no limit when it comes to driving high.
The law was not written in a way to test people's blood and determine whether or not they're actually under the influence of THC.
Jason Lathrop is a drug recognition expert with the Rochester Police Department. He says some states are using a saliva test to detect THC, but they are not being used in New York currently. Instead, experts rely on field sobriety tests. DREs will also look for things like bloodshot eyes and dilated pupils.
Sometimes the back of the tongue will have very large raised taste buds if they've been smoking cannabis. THC also on the tongue fluoresces like a fluorescent orange, fluorescent red color under a ultraviolet light.
Monroe County Sheriff's Captain Rick Bancroft says conviction rates in these cases can depend on whether an officer has the advanced training to identify someone who is high and how long an officer has been a DRE.
Comes down to first and foremost the observations of the officer making the arrest, telling the judge or jury, this is why I arrested this person. The more training you have, the better the conviction rate's going to be.
King says there are certainly marijuana cases that are prosecutable in court. But now with many police officers wearing body-worn cameras, it's no longer just a police report painting the picture.
We can see them answering the questions. We can see them walking around the scene. And those are the things that we use as defense lawyers to try to get to the truth and justice. And really, I don't think the conviction rate on driving while ability impaired by marijuana is very high in the community.
The legalization of marijuana in New York is raising concerns about drivers being high behind the wheel.
In tonight's special report, 13 WHAM's Chase Houle explains how police enforce catching those who are under the influence of cannabis.
Drugged driving is when anybody is impaired to the degree they're unsafe to drive when they have something besides alcohol in their system.
Captain Rick Bancroft with the Monroe County Sheriff's Office says nearly half of his DWI stops are marijuana related. Captain Bancroft says driving drunk and driving drugged have similar indicators.
The mechanism on the brain, whether you're drunk or drugged, is going to display itself the same way when you're behind the wheel.
He says things like swerving, speeding, going too slow, and delayed reactions of lights are signs someone may be driving drugged. Jason Lathrop, a drug recognition expert for the Rochester Police Department, says his job is to indicate whether someone is driving drunk or driving drugged.
They're looking to see if the impairment matches a blood alcohol content or no blood alcohol content. And if that impairment is there, is it medical related or drug related? Once they determine that it is drug related, they continue on.
Lathrop says they use a 12-step process. During the process, Lathrop says he checks vital signs and does a psychophysical test similar to a sobriety test. Once a drug recognition expert rules out alcohol, Lathrop says they look for other things like bloodshot eyes and dilated pupils.
Sometimes the back of the tongue will have very large raised taste buds if they've been smoking cannabis. THC also on the tongue fluoresces like a fluorescent orange, fluorescent red color under a ultraviolet light.
There's no defined chemical slope that we can provide for marijuana, not that we can find yet. To that end, our officers rely upon those field sobriety tests. And they're going to rely upon those extra training the A-RIDE officers have or the drug recognition experts have.
Chase Houle, 13 WHAM News.
In another report coming up later this month, Chase Houle investigates how drugged driving holds up in court with no chemical tests that they can administer.